This is Judge Joe Brown, and we're listening to We All Be News, news-free Dixie for the 21st century.
We have a very special guest on. He's a world-class political assassination expert, a very passionate young man, very brilliant, insightful. He has bequeathed the world a plethora of different scenarios and insight into some of the greatest tragedies and assassinations of the past 20th century. This person who I'm talking about is none other than Brother John Judge. Are you there, Brother John Judge?
I am. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you for being on We All Be News and Radio. And people are probably wondering, like, what's this guy about? Who is John Judge? What is it that you do and that you do so well?
Well, I'm a political activist, also an independent researcher and investigator into political assassinations as well as government covert operations, mind control, and other aspects. I currently am the executive director of an organization founded in 1994 called the Coalition on Political Assassinations. We're a national network of medical ballistic forensics experts, academicians, and authors, and independent researchers and citizens like myself, and we try to pull together the best evidence in these cases of political assassination and present them. I also do a 9/11 research project that's been going for a few years, working with thousands of books and documents, trying to get beyond the official explanation given in the unsubstantiated official report of the 9/11 Commission. So I've worked with a number of commission reports. I worked up on the Hill for about 2 years with Representative Cynthia McKinney and helped her do presentations and investigations and briefings around these topics. And I've continued my work. This is an anniversary year, as you may know, for both Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, 40 years since they were killed in '68. We did conferences in Memphis and just finished a successful one in L.A. with brand new evidence in that case. We were also able this year, on the 33rd anniversary of Malcolm X's assassination, to hold a co-sponsored panel discussion on the anniversary of his death, February 21st, at the new Malcolm X Dr. Betty Shabazz Historical and Cultural Center that's been created in the old Audubon Ballroom where he was shot. And we're going on to Dallas, November 21st to 23rd, with a conference there with the latest on JFK and the other assassinations. So we pull together the best authors and speakers and new scientific and forensic evidence in these cases. And we've also been instrumental in getting past the John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Act, which to date has released over 6.5 million pages. It's one of the largest releases of classified documents in U.S. history. And we are working to push for a Martin Luther King Records Act to get all the files out on Dr. King. So that's a little about my background. I grew up in the shadow of the secret government. My parents were Pentagon employees, and I lived in the bedroom communities of the Pentagon and the NSA and the CIA, and those were my neighbors. I used to listen to them when they got drunk at their parties, and I knew quite early that there were two governments operating in this country. And I just became an independent researcher. I've always liked to read and research, and I wanted to get at the truth.
What got you started in this life work, this commitment to this particular area of study or research?
Well, I read a critic's book in 1967, Mark Twain's Rush to Judgment, and I thought, if this guy's half right, it really needs to be looked into. And then I was in college at the time, I went about reading the entire Warren Commission report in the 26 volumes, 8,000 pages of evidence that were supposed to back it up, but it did not. I went through archives material, and I worked with a lot of the early critics, and I had mentors like Penn Jones and Mae Brussel, who took me further than the Kennedy assassination and into the political assassinations and related deaths over the years, so that I began to see the connections emerging. I was also a Vietnam War opponent, and so my research into how we got into Vietnam linked me into much of the Cold War and covert operation history of the United States, which continues to this day. And as I often say, the presidents come and go, but the Pentagon and the CIA sit and grow. And Kennedy, I think, is specifically an example of a president that began to buck that national security state, what Eisenhower originally wrote in his memo, a military-industrial intelligence complex. That was his original draft, and the rise of it that he warned against. Well, it not only rose, but it took out President Kennedy when he began to fight it, and he was going to withdraw from Vietnam. I know that through the work that my mother did for the Joint Chiefs, projecting the annual national draft call figures. I can tell you a little bit about that story later, but he was threatening the oil tax depletion allowance, which was $13 billion in 1963. That was real money. It was financing national elections in this country and keeping the oil people in business, as similar funding does today.
Right.
And he was saying in October that he would scatter the CIA to the four winds because of how they lied to him about the Bay of Pigs. And he stood up against Curtis LeMay and the Joint Chiefs on the Cold War and détente and ending the nuclear arms race, and also stopped them from going to nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was trying to create normalization of the relation with Cuba before he died. And he was pushing racial integration, too slow for the black community, but certainly too fast for the Southern Rim and the racists in this country. And, the Cubans were mad at him for not overthrowing Castro militarily. So the people that organized this went around to his various enemies and got them involved at a grassroots or mechanical level in the assassination, so at the time they could take credit and later, if necessary, take blame without the hand being seen. But the hand that I saw going through all these documents in all of these assassinations relates back to a national security state which is really dominated not by the CIA and the FBI, although they're part of it, but by a much more secretive DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, all the branch intelligences, the National Security Agency, National Reconnaissance Organization, whose initials used to be secret, the spy satellites, and a whole team of special operatives who carry out the ideas that the CIA comes up with. The CIA is merely a think tank. If they want to have an assassination or overthrow a country, they have to go to the DIA and ask them, because they have the tools and they have the special forces and the SEALs and the other people that can go in and carry out these operations or pay people to do them. And the budget of the DIA, which most people have never heard of, is 10 times that of the CIA and the FBI combined. They have 100 times more employees, and they take up 85% of the intelligence budget in this country. But you can find 600 books on the CIA. I challenge you to find 5 books on the Office of Naval Intelligence, the oldest and largest intelligence network in the United States, or on the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency itself. There's almost nothing in print. Bamford is one author who's written 2 books on the NSA, and I found 2 or 3 books on the history of the ONI, mostly written by the Navy itself. So they're not something that's visible, but they are what's operating beneath the surface. And once we get to the end of World War II, with the establishment of the national security state, where our history begins to be buried as a commodity of the state, and they begin the propaganda necessary to carry on permanent war economy of the Cold War and try to extend that. They have no interest in ending wars. Wars are very profitable, and they bring them control over resources and geographically significant areas of the world and geopolitical strategies, and they really now are projecting out into space, and they want total battle force dominance over everywhere on Earth. That's their vision of the future, but mine is a little different.
That's amazing. I mean, like, man, it's really kind of damn scary. I don't lie to you, because what you're telling me is that the government was complicit in all these assassinations of these important figures.
Absolutely.
These American
also,
citizens.
the people that we think did the assassinations did not in any of those.
So the mafia didn't have anything to do with it. It was just as much as
the mafia, like these other groups, the mafia was opposed to Kennedy because Robert was going after them. And they wanted him out. But the mafia by itself could not plan to assassinate the president and get away with it. So the mafia were involved, again, as I say, on the mechanical level. But they weren't the originators. The originators were the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the purpose was a coup d'etat. And that's why John Kennedy was killed. Malcolm was killed in large part, I believe, because he began to come closer to Dr. King, and the two together represented what the FBI called black messiahs, people that could rise to power and actually command the respect and take the leadership of the black community in a direction that would have pushed not only on the civil rights and racism issues, but also on the issue of militarism and war. It was Malcolm X that was one of the leaders in the first anti-Vietnam War march in New York City, the first one.
And this is before Dr. King came out, that famous
speech
at Riverside.
Years before. And 64, they had the first major march, and King didn't come out until 68. 67, April 4, 67 at Riverside Church, a year to the day before he was killed. But it was, and also that the two of them were going to work together on poverty issues and address poverty and racism on both a national and international scale, and that threatened the system to a level that they felt that they couldn't contain Malcolm, and so he was assassinated, again, with the help of enemies that he already had within the Nation of Islam, but with the directorship of military intelligence. And
so Farrakhan is really not responsible to the degree that a lot of people think he is.
Well, my research and the research of Babazak Kondo wrote Conspiracies Unraveling the Death of Malcolm X, and some of the other people that researched the assassination certainly feel that Farrakhan had a role in organizing some of the gunmen that met in a mosque in New Jersey the night before, and then came up and did a dry run-through in the ballroom the night before the shooting. And I think for some time Betty Shabazz felt that Farrakhan had at least a hand in it on the end of the black Muslims, but on the other, and interestingly enough, I mean, think about how vicious this is, the COINTELPRO forces, the FBI, the counterintelligence program, and the ways that they would try to pit people against each other. Years and years after the assassination of Malcolm, and after these suspicions came out about Farrakhan, a white FBI agent took advantage of the fact that one of Malcolm's daughters was drug addicted and started supplying her drugs and got her confidence and got into a relationship with her, and then began to convince her that she should be angry about the death of her father and that she should go and be part of an operation to kill Farrakhan. And the thing blew up before it happened, and it came out that this guy was an FBI informant and on the payroll of the agency.
Is it true that Elijah Muhammad is like the guy, I guess he used to replace Malcolm? I believe his name was John Ali or something like that. I'm not sure. Was he an FBI agent too? The press secretary,
I've read some stuff that indicates, but certainly the security around Malcolm included operatives, Gene Roberts from the Bureau of Special Services in New York, and Dr. Manning Marable is doing a new biography of Malcolm he's reinvestigated the entire assassination. I heard him speak up at U Maryland, and he has identified other people on security around Malcolm who were in fact working for FBI and intelligence agencies. And also there was an international interest in CIA interest in Malcolm and what he was doing toward Pan-Africanism and elements of that part of the international aspect that they were going after him too. There was a threat, you may remember, against him in France where that was being orchestrated by CIA. And Dr. King, in the last few days of his life, we've gotten loose records of complete surveillance of him by 3 different groups. The FBI, both under Rybat, which was an anti-communist program because he was supposedly taking orders from Peking, according to their informant, and under COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program, but also simultaneously by the CIA under Operation Chaos. They were looking at him, and when I say looking at him, I mean looking through each piece of his garbage, putting bugs inside of his hotel rooms, surveilling him from nearby, and then on top of that, Army intelligence was surveilling him under Operation Garden Plot and a subcategory called Lantern Spike, which was in Memphis at the time, and on top of him in the same way, and each even had snipers, according to Dr. William Pepper's book, Orders to Kill, on a nearby railroad building tower that had him in their sights at the time the other person killed him as a backup that wasn't used. So all of them were surrounding him and were afraid of him. And, because once he broadened the agenda to the three pillars, as he used to talk about, of oppression, not just the racism, but also militarism and poverty, that was an agenda that they knew cut to the heart of where they were going. And he was safe if they froze him on the steps, as history has, in 1963 with his I Have a Dream speech for civil rights and integration. But if they move him to 68, and what he was saying then, he was too much of a threat to the system. Bobby Kennedy picked up the trails of that. He wanted to reopen his brother's case. He knew that there had been a conspiracy in the assassination of his brother, and he told people he was going to reopen it. He told them he knew there were guns between him and the White House. He wanted to push for social and economic justice and end to racism and follow his brother's path of getting out of Vietnam, full withdrawal of troops. And so he also was eliminated, right at the point where the primaries turned his candidacy into a win. He was shot. And there's connections between the people that are involved in these various shootings, and they also include shootings of right-wing people that are in the way of that agenda. I studied the George Wallace shooting. I studied the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan, and many of them go back to
General Walker, too, right? General Edwin Walker?
Yes, who was in fact not a right-wing general, who was supposedly shot at by Oswald, but the witnesses saw two people, not Oswald, and there's no real evidence, in my view, that Oswald shot at him or anybody else. And Oswald was not on the 6th floor of the book depository. He didn't fire a gun that day. James Earl Ray was not in the rooming house, and King was killed by a gun in a different location than the rooming house that lifted him up and spun him to his right, which is different than a bullet coming down at him from the right would do. And also, even though Sirhan was definitely in close proximity and firing, none of his bullets hit Robert Kennedy. Robert Kennedy was killed.
You tell me the guy who's in prison right now for RFK assassination, none of his bullets hit Robert Kennedy?
That's right. And
did he hit anybody else in the hotel kitchen?
There were many other people in the hotel kitchen. And Carl Euchre, the maitre d', grabbed Sirhan's arm after the second shot and pushed it down onto a steam table, and then was whacking his arm to get the gun loose from his hand, and Sirhan kept firing, and there were many other witnesses wounded, but all of the shots that hit Robert Kennedy came at close proximity from behind and below his back. The shot that was fatal to him came at a distance of, Dr. Noguchi said, no more than 2 to 3 inches, and in fact, when they've done powder residue tests on cloth, it was actually a half an inch away from his head. Sirhan's gun was never that near Robert Kennedy. It was in front of Kennedy. The shot that killed him came from behind. The shots through his jacket and the one that went into his body came from behind at an upward angle. There were too many holes in the ceiling panels and door jams and all the wounded witnesses to be accounted for by Sirhan's 8 bullets. We've known for years there was a second gun in the pantry, and that there was a security guard right behind Robert Kennedy who at least one newsman saw fire a gun 3 times into Kennedy, and who admitted to drawing his gun but not firing it, but then lied about owning the gun.
Wait a minute, is a security guard hired to protect Robert Kennedy?
Yeah, it was hotel security.
Hotel security. He fired the gun into Robert. You saying that he was fired in defense, or you saying he lied about firing the gun?
He wasn't firing at Sirhan. He lied later about when he sold the gun that would have matched the bullets. Now we have an acoustic tape that surfaced after 20 years in the archives that we had 2 leading experts present, Dr. Robert Joling, former head of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, and Philip von Prague, an audio and engineer and expert, who analyzed this tape, and it's a newsman's tape in the pantry where you can hear the shots. And it's the only extant tape, but they did comparison with other tapes. Parts of the tapes overlap with some tapes before. They've got the timing exactly right. They got photographic, evidence of him being there with the tape in the proximity. And when you analyze this tape of the pantry shots, there are clearly 13 shots, and 5 of the shots show a different sound resonance signature, which doesn't match the Ivers Johnson 22 that Sirhan had, but it matches a Harrington pistol that the guard owned. So it's consistent also with what many of the researchers have believed. And this is hard scientific evidence. It's just starting to come out. An Open and Shut Case is the name of the website you can see it at. And they presented at our conference. Our board included Dr. Herbert McDonald. He's probably the leading ballistic expert in the country. He took the bullets from Robert Kennedy's body and the test bullets that the LAPD said came from Sirhan's gun and put them into a device he developed called a balliscan macrograph. This takes two bullets and puts them in little cylinders and turns them in sync 360 degrees and photographs them as they turn. Then the photograph is blown up into a 6-foot by 3-foot banner so that every groove, every land, I mean, it's like having a microscope on the bullet, but you've got it in a picture. And it tracks them together, and so you can see by putting one on top of the other exactly whether the lands and the grooves match the rifling of the bullet, and in this case they did not. But McDonald also noted that even the cantilevers and the gross characteristics of the bullets on their outside and the manufacture was different, and they were different types of 22 shells. So they didn't really match at all. But LAPD ignored all this, buried the evidence, took the testimony at court of Dwayne Wolfer, who switched guns and lied on the stand about what he had done in the case, and then just tried to cover it up and close it. But many independent researchers have kept going with it, and now we have this new and hard evidence. And there's breaking evidence all the time in these cases. Dr. Pepper brought a civil suit, William Pepper, on behalf of the King family that exonerated Ray with the hard evidence. When Judge Joe Brown actually tested the rifle after all these years on Ray, he found that rifle was not the murder weapon and could not have fired the bullet that was taken from Dr. King. There's continually breaking evidence. John F. Kennedy case, two things this year. The FBI admitted that in over 2,000 cases they had been using a ballistic method to match bullets that was no good. And that went back to 1963. It was the same method that was used on matching the bullets of Oswald's alleged rifle to the Kennedy assassination. And the Italians tested a Mannlicher Carcano from exactly the same manufacturing batch that supposedly Oswald used to kill Kennedy, and found that they couldn't get 3 shots out for that gun in anything less than 18 seconds, but the shots that are fired and heard on audio tape and their effects are seen in the Zapruder film don't have a span of 6.2 seconds. So there's absolutely no way that gun could have possibly even gotten 3 bullets out, much less done the damage.
I mean, this is interesting. You just got some more information. And what's the website that people go to to get in touch with you?
Well, our website is politicalassassinations.com. And you'll see stuff up there from our last 3 conferences, and we always have breaking news articles, and we're up to date on top of what's happening with it. So it's Political Assassinations, that's plural with an S.com. And it also announces our upcoming conferences and meetings, and we'll be in Dallas November 21st to the 23rd. We do a moment of silence on the grassy knoll every year at 12:30, and we stay at a hotel just off Dealey Plaza, the Hotel Lawrence. And so we'll be there this year and hopefully have some of the best speakers and new and interesting information and films. And we showed 2 new films at our LA conference, one called RFK Must Die by Shane O'Sullivan and Mark Sobel, award-winning documentarian who did a film about the Warren Commission, has done a new one just called RFK, but he re-interviews some of the key people and who were witnesses at the time and who were part of the case. So much of the evidence is coming out and being reviewed again. There may be a move by Dr. Pepper, who's now Sirhan's attorney, to bring a new civil suit, and I know that Paul Schrade, one of the witnesses who was wounded at the time, a Kennedy worker who stuck with the case and tried to keep it open, who spoke along with Dr. Joling and Philip von Prague, want to get that aspect of the case reopened as well on the on the fact that there was a second gunman in the pantry, and to try to help identify who that was. So It's not a dead topic by any means. A lot of people ask me, why are you still doing something about these things that were, 40, 50 years old? It'll be the 45th anniversary for JFK. But it's because the dynamics that they set into motion and the damage they did to the democracy in this country, the hope that they killed primarily, and the aspects for change, that reverberates right up into the present day. And just the fact that they can take our candidates or our presidents away when they start to turn a direction that responds to popular will, you can't live in a society like that and call that a democracy. You can't ask, in my view, for young African-American men to follow in the footsteps of Dr. King or Malcolm if you won't solve their murders.
Right.
Because then you're saying to them, well, you can take that risk, we won't look into who killed you either. And beyond that, we have a pernicious and illegal and criminal, institutions operating in a democratic society without accountability, without going to jail, and doing things like political assassinations and covert operations behind our back. And we wake up on September 11th and say, why do they hate us? Well, we don't know the history of what's been done in our name by our intelligence agencies and our military abroad. If we did know that history, we'd know why people are angry with us, because we've overthrown their democratic governments, we've killed their leadership, we've stolen their resources, and we've intervened in their sovereignty and their politics for many, many years. And they can see the American hand there, even though we are, lied to by a propaganda machine, Wurlitzer, that calls itself the media, so that we don't know what our history is and we don't know what's being done under the name of America abroad.
I think it's interesting because there's so many things, man, just listening to you. I could just listen to you for hours. And just listening to you, and I talk myself a lot, but to know that you know what you're talking about, because when you're talking about RFK, I'm thinking about, they said, well, Dr. Carl Weiss, West killed Huey Long. Then it could have came from his bodyguards, a machine, they were shooting bullets everywhere. And I was thinking about, FDR, when the quote-unquote assassination attempt on his life ended up taking up, the mayor of Chicago, Anton Cermak. But was it really geared to FDR? Or you just start having all these things rolling in your head, like even with Reagan's supposed hit on Reagan.
Yeah.
I mean, look what the VP was. It was kind of like a Lyndon B. Johnson JFK thing. I mean, George Bush to the CIA and the oil man.
The Washington Post said that night that it was ironic that Neil Bush, George H.W. Bush's son, our president's brother, and Scott Hinckley, the older brother of John Hinckley, the gunman arrested for shooting Reagan, although none of his bullets hit Reagan either. But the two of them were going to have dinner that night, Scott Hinckley and Neil Bush, and
wow.
And they said that was ironic and that they had canceled their dinner plans. Well, if I told you that Robert Oswald, Oswald's brother, older brother, and one of LBJ's daughters were going to have dinner the night of November 22nd, 1963, would you call that ironic? Right. Or would you think it meant something?
I think it meant something.
I mean, if it is ironic, then I'm an irony theorist, but I think it means a little bit. And Reagan said when he woke up at the hospital, he said, "Get me the demographics on that kid." Well, the demographics on that kid are the Bush family, because the Bushes and the Hinkleys are financially and socially tied for years. The Bushes bailed out Hinckley's father's oil company. One of the Bush nieces makes dating arrangements for Scott Hinckley. Scott and Neil have been involved in oil speculation operations. They lived in the same area in Houston, the two families, and they're very tight. And so I'm sure that Reagan figured out that Bush had nearly killed him, and after that, Reagan went out to watch movies at at the compound, and he would fly in under the helicopters and wave to the press, but he didn't say anything. And I really feel that was the first Bush presidency, began March 31, 81, and we're really in our fifth Bush term right now. That was an ascendancy by Bush, and they stole the command and control module away from Reagan. They came back and tried to get it. A Secret Service guy and the military guy that's supposed to keep it with him came back and tried to get the wallet. Get the FBI to cut the wallet out of his pants because it had the activation card. Haig was down in the Situation Room. The Haig and the Bush loyalists were arguing with the Reagan loyalists. I think they were arguing also whether they were going to keep him alive, because Reagan takes off in an unescorted limousine after the shooting, well before they get to Brady. It takes almost 5 minutes to get the ambulance to Brady.
Mm-hmm.
Brady beats Reagan to GWU. Brady gets to GWU 15 minutes before Reagan gets there. And I tracked all this very closely. So in the Secret Service guy's book about the shooting, and he incidentally says to this day, he's a 160-pound man. He was at the back door, holding the back door open. He was hit in the groin by Hinckley's bullet, and Hinckley lifted into the air. Mm-hmm. Sorry, not Hinckley, I mean the Secret Service guy, lifted into the air and fell at the front bumper of the car. And he says to this day, that was no damn 22. And in fact, for the first 6 hours, the gun was identified as a 38 by all the press, and then it turns into a 22, just like the gun up in the book depository that's supposed to be Oswald's gun was first identified as a German Mauser and not as an Italian Mannlicher Carcano. And it was only hours later that they switched. So in this case, and everybody that's hit by Hinckley's bullets, Brady, whose brains are nearly blown out, a beefy cop named Delahanty, who was hit in the neck and spun around, slammed to the ground. The Secret Service agent that was lifted up into the air and deposited at the front of the car looked like they're being hit with a 38. Reagan, when he's hit, hardly reacts. And he doesn't even react as much as if he was hit with a 22, because he's hit with a tiny disc. And they use them sometimes to contain shellfish toxin that can cause a heart attack without leaving anything but a little razor slit. And the doctors and nurses at GWU know what a gunshot wound looks like, but he was in there for about 15 to 20 minutes before one of the nurses, they thought he was having a heart attack. One of the nurses finally noticed this little razor slit with some black blood under his arm, and she thought, well, maybe a fragment had hit him, and they almost closed him without taking it out. They went 3 times. And then they finally got it out, and the doctors, I read the medical journals, and the doctors described it as round, flat as a dime, and razor-edged. Well, these are these discs can be fired from guns. They're very accurate the length of a football field. They can be fired with a CO2 cartridge, just a puff of air, so it doesn't make any noise. And the doctors described the trajectory at the press conference from the hospital where they took Reagan as on a downward angle, and from back to front and from left to right. Well, that's exactly the opposite of where Hinckley was standing. But when Reagan raises his arm, he has to wave to the press. That's when he's hit, and he has no protection. His lungs collapse, his cheeks puff out. The official story doesn't have him hit until he goes into the car, but he's on the front of Time magazine, and many news pictures saying Reagan is hit because you can see his reaction to being hit. But the official story is they're pushing him into the car, and then the bullet ricochets, and goes around. But in fact, what hit Reagan hit him then, and they, according to the Secret Service agent's book, turned right at T Street and headed north on Connecticut. Well, when you do that, you're not going toward GWU Hospital, George Washington University Hospital, where he ended up. You're going toward Bethesda Naval Hospital, where they did the phony autopsy on JFK.
Right.
My belief is that they were taking Reagan up there to finish him off and do a phony autopsy. And then the Loyalists started arguing, and so the agreement was, after 10 or 15 minutes, to let him live, but he had to stay out of the way. At that point, they turned the car around. That's why he gets back, all the way back down there later than Brady does. And I saw that night on ABC News, because I was turning on everything I could turn on, following the details right from the start. And on ABC News, they had the head of the emergency room interviewed, and they said, the newsman said, I understand that when Reagan came in, there were people who wanted to move him up to Bethesda Hospital. And he said, that's right. He said, but when someone comes into my operating theater and my hospital in that condition, they're not moving. I don't care whether the President of the United States or not. So unbeknownst to him, I think he really saved Reagan's life. And he wouldn't let them move him. And he said, and then the ABC guy said, no matter how much the Navy yells. That was what he said. And the guy says, that's right, no matter how much the Navy yells. Well, what's the Navy yelling about? And he said that they hounded him until 6 in the morning to try to move him up to Bethesda. Meanwhile, Haig and the others are trying to get control of a working command and control center, which gives you nuclear options and other things. And he couldn't find a card, and he sent the other guy down to get the card out of the wallet, and the FBI guy wouldn't give it up because he called Sessions, who was in the room where they were all arguing, and Sessions said, hold on to the card. And then Haig, if you remember, emerges, and he says, gentlemen, I'm in charge here until the vice president returns.
Like an episode of 24 or something like that.
That's right.
Well, actually, like, this is kind of like, you know, crazy. I mean, like, even with RFK, it's like he knew that the government conspired against his brother.
Yes.
He knew that Lyndon B. Johnson had a part in it, correct? Or did he feel that Lyndon B. Johnson had a part in it?
Well, I'm sure he was suspicious of Johnson, but he knew certainly that it came from something other than Oswald and that there was more to it. He had to investigate it. And there's a new book, Brothers, by David Talbot, if people haven't seen it, that lays out what Bobby knew and what he suspected. But Johnson certainly knew it was coming. I don't think Johnson was the primary planner.
Okay.
I think Johnson was just as afraid they could take him out afterwards. And he actually went to Carl Rowan, one of the few African Americans in government at that time, and asked him, you know, do you think they're going to kill me too? He was. Who
was they? He was thinking of, was it the Cubans? Or the Russians?
It was ours. He said, damn Murder Incorporated operating in the Caribbean. He talked to the Dallas Businesses Association in February. I got that speech out of the record. And he's talking to them, and he says, you know, when you're flying over choppy waters, you don't knock the pilot in the head. You wait till he lands on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, at least wait until November before you shoot him down. Well, November wasn't an election year.
Mm-hmm.
63. So what the hell is he talking about? At least wait till November before you shoot him down. Dallas Businesses Association certainly included the Dallas oil men. There were meetings with top-level people, Nixon, and
they was all in Dallas the day that Kennedy got shot. Was Nixon like that? I don't know. Are we going to look at all of the
there, and he's one of about four people who can't remember where they were that day initially. When they were asked, and sometimes for years later. Now, they'll start amnesiacs back into remembering where they were sometimes by asking them where they were when Kennedy was killed. Because if you were of age, people remember it, like this generation will know where they were on 9/11.
Yeah, definitely.
And so they start unraveling it that way. But so I was always suspicious of anyone who said they didn't know where they were, and he actually testified to the Warren Commission that he didn't recall where he was on that day. And then 13 years later, he started in interviews, and he had one on Larry King's show where he suddenly recalled that he'd been in Dallas meeting with the Pepsi-Cola company and had flown out that morning before the shooting, he says, and even though the airports were closed. And he says he didn't find out about the shooting until he got to New York. But he was meeting with mob people there that were tied to the assassination of the Fox brothers at the bottling company, and he was supporting Don Kendall, who later got the contract for PepsiCo in Russia, and he was reportedly at these meetings with Ford and other key people. Some of Ruby's strippers were there at Murchison's ranch, at an oilman's ranch, the night before the assassination, where a lot of people feel that that the planning went on for the killing. And I think LBJ basically knew it was coming. He's the only one that ducks in Dealey Plaza. Everyone else is looking around for firecrackers. He's down. His Secret Service guy, Rufus Youngblood, jumps on top of him in the car when the first shot fires. And and meanwhile, the other guys are being told to hold back and not run forward and protect the Kennedys.
It's disturbing.
In the airport, where one of the guys who's following procedure and walking along beside the back of the car is called off, and he's putting his hands out like, why are you calling me off? What am I doing wrong? I'm just doing my job, But they basically pulled the bubble top off the car, the weather bubble, which could have deflected a shot, and then they pulled the Secret Service guys off that would have been riding on the back and getting in the way of shots. And so Kennedy was basically left out there in the open. In the same way that Reagan is, if you look, there's no diamond around Reagan of protection. The Secret Service all file to his right side down the sidewalk, and they don't follow procedure. And the car, normally, like when it first showed up, It's parked right in front of the exit door he comes out of. Secret Service form a line on either side of the door, and he comes through. The car, when he comes out of that meeting, is way down the sidewalk, like 45, 50 feet down the sidewalk, so he has to walk right out into the open and make himself vulnerable to the shot.
It's like it's a no-brainer. Like certain things that have been done. It's like, I mean, why? First of all, parade them like down the street where there are like a bunch of high-rises or a bunch of tall buildings, and like you said, the protection. And I also think about what Lyndon B. Johnson, like, you know, the thing that came out, the man who killed Kennedy, and the History Channel had to make an apology to the late Lady Bird Johnson and some of his loyalists about how he.
A lot of that research was good on him, you know.
So it was correct, but also I like Johnson was on his way.
You remember, Johnson was put in office financially all of his career, from Texas politics all the way up to Congress and into the White House. He was financed by George Brown of a company called Brown and Root that got $4 billion contract on the Vietnam War and got became a subsidiary of Kellogg. Brown and Root joined Kellogg and then went under Halliburton. And so they were getting like hundreds of billions of dollars off of this war. Finally, their corruption, Halliburton broke off from them, and they're independent again, but they still haven't been punished for it. And they were basically war profiteers who didn't want Kennedy pulling out of Vietnam. And so I think, that financing around Johnson had an impact in terms of them wanting to put him in because he would go ahead with their program in a way that Kennedy would not.
Was he like under investigation when his Civil Secretary Bobby Baker? Was he on the threat of going to jail for a long, long time?
Yeah, there were several scandals brewing at the time. I mean, that kind of, I think it's clear that otherwise he would have never been president. I think the Kennedys were moving to take him off the ticket, so he also understood it was his last chance. And I think he went along with the plot, but I think he knew it was beyond him. He just didn't get in the way, and he also helped with the cover-up. My friend Carl Chasky always says, if you want to commit the perfect crime, control the investigation.
I mean, basically what he did, he was about Gerald Ford. He was a part of the people interviewing Jack Ruby and others. Like Jack Ruby wanted to go to D.C. to testify, and Gerald Ford basically brushed him off. And
Ford.
I mean, it's crazy. He's not even being president. So Bush is Bush connected with the Bush family, Halliburton, of course, but also Bush as the oil man and
CIA. Plotting moved up pretty far, didn't they?
Yeah, wow, this is like Shakespeare. This is sad, man. So really,
even the newsmen that lied about it did well. Newsmen on the site that were saying three bullets.
Man.
How many there were? They all got top jobs. Dan Rather and Moyers moved up that way, and
he was press secretary for Johnson, correct?
And they were all right there, and they made their careers on being there. But they also, all of them, said 3 shots right away. The guy even pulled the phone out of the Merriman Smith. Pulled the press phone out of the car after he reported the 3 shots, so nobody else could get in another call. Went to White House press secretary, and there were press conferences for AP, and so they were way up there. And if you played that game, you'd probably play anyone. So you got your reward.
Man, I know his father's. I think it's so important that we make an issue. Robert Kennedy, when he died, he had 11 kids. Malcolm, he got killed, had 4 kids and 2 on the way.
Yeah.
He died, had 4 kids. And Medgar Evers, the 40th anniversary of his passing was this week as well, and he had 3 kids.
I believe.
Why would he guys risk him?
I think a number of the Kennedy children have been killed since.
Yeah.
To keep them in line. But I'm sorry, what was your question?
Well, I was saying, what would make a guy? I don't care how idealistic they are, put their self on the line if they got a family to raise. But what would make a Kennedy? They knew the odds.
I think sometimes people feel that the present and what looks like the future is going to be so bad for their children that they take risks on their behalf, in the same way that some people go into wars because they believe that, even though if they die and leave their children behind, that if they can stop that the life of their children will be worse. If a Hitler or something comes in, I think people think that way. So sometimes people take that risk even though they have children. I think the system relies on us, to have families and feel that we can't threaten the families, so we stay in line economically, and otherwise we don't complain, we don't burden in that direction. But sometimes conditions get so bad and people don't see a future for their children, and so that, I think, overwhelms the risk they're taking that they might be killed.
I mean, like, yeah, have you ever, like, you know, I talk to friends on the Beltway, and they work for these congressmen and senators and whatnot. They always talk about how they were so idealistic when they came to D.C., and now they so, like, cynical, they so discouraged about
I often tell people who come here to make change, and they're all excited, and I said, you know, the brick wall doesn't get any softer the harder you run at it.
Right. Man, what keeps you motivated, though? I mean, what keeps you? I mean, you're such a guy that, I mean, I just applaud you and for the work you have done. I know, like, people look at you with scrutiny and stuff like that, but this work that you dedicate your life to, like, you really gave birth to a cause.
Well, I just wanted to get at the truth. I would be more frightened and discouraged if I couldn't find the truth, but I think you can find it despite how much they've hidden and continue to hide. But I think, you know, our main problem now is that our history has been put into underground bunkers. Literally, there's 27 1-acre buildings, 27 of them out at Suitland in Maryland, that are just the classified military records since World War II.
Mm.
And, you know, our history is literally being buried. And so the only thing that's worked, Freedom of Information Act doesn't work, are these models like the JFK Records Act where you can get at least millions of pages. It's not millions of records. And you're up against the fact that just last year, 15.5 million records, so you're probably talking an average of 10 pages at least per record, were classified anew. And also, the Bush administration has been sending people into the archives to look at records that were previously declassified and released and making them classified again, and there's been over 1 million records in that category.
Mm.
They're re-burying our history. But eventually, if you don't own your history, you're a conquered people. And so we have a fight to make the government more transparent. We have a big fight to make the government less militaristic and to stop this war machinery, this military-industrial intelligence complex that's really taken over the direction of our country and made our lives, you know, miserable as well, not to mention all the genocide it's created around the world and these covert operations and the secrecy. You can't live in a democracy when those things go on. You've got to address them and you've got to stop them. And it's not impossible to change them, but, you know, people have to take a stand and people have to work together. We have to take back the educational system and the media, but those are still legally a commonwealth. They belong to the people. They don't belong to the corporations. The corporations may own the stations. They may monopolize the bands that they're buying, but they buy those bands on conditions from the FCC, which is a public agency, and those conditions of licenses could be changed to give time back to the real public for full debate on issues and use of the media for public purpose. Like when they go to HDTV,
right.
They let the people who want to watch HDTV, you know, buy that and do that, but take all the rest of the information that's currently coming, because it comes in on the same cable, I was told, and some people get both right now. So give us back all the analog stations, and if somebody wants the HDTV to add on, they can, but the analog stations would be given back to public use so we can educate each other. But I think when people do have the truth, the problem is Martin Schatz, one of the Kennedy critics way back, wrote to Vince Salandria, another critic, and great line that's in his book, History Will Not Absolve Us. And he says that the political paralysis in America is based on the fact that we're allowed to believe anything but to know nothing. And when you can't know, you can't responsibly act. But I think it is possible to know. I don't think they want us to know, but it's easier for people to just believe the next thing they hear, and it takes some work to know, and the truth is slippery, you know, and if all you're going to do is believe what you already believe, you know, and you only listen to the facts that support that, you know, then you're going to end up where the system wants you. Malcolm said, if you read the newspapers long enough, you'll end up loving the people doing the oppressing and hating the people being oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to, I stopped watching TV in the 1970s. I haven't really turned on a TV. 9/11 was about the last time I looked at a television, just because I had to know what was happening. That day I was at ground 0.5. I'm about a mile from the Pentagon. The blast shook my window. And then I saw the Park Police with Uzis, and I heard them declaring continuity of government, which is basically martial law. And I didn't know whether they were going to clamp the city down or how much more there was to the scenario. So I got in my car and got out.
Right.
They also told the government employees to go home, and I know after that they don't care about anybody that lives here.
I mean, it's just like it's so much work to be done. There's just so much things that people can do. It's like I look at with Barack Obama. I want to get your insight into that, like his candidacy. Even he admitted that it takes the will of the people to get things done. You put me in office, but it takes your will. Like the same thing that FBI told A.L.L. Randolph. I know the things you say are true about the struggles and the stuff that your people are going through, but you got to force me to make a difference. You got to force me to change the policy. And even with JFK, I mean, the Kennedy administration, they were forced by the Kings and by James Meredith, by Medgar Evers, by
all those type of people. It wasn't that they were saints. It's just that there were popular movements for an end to the arms race and for an end to the war and for the like you say, the civil rights struggle. But the difference is they responded to those things, started to try to change them instead of just fighting them like all the rest of the presidents have done or ignoring them, and so that was, I think, another reason why they had been killed, because they were giving people hope. Our 3 conferences this year, the one on Dr. King was called Killing the Dream, the one on Robert Kennedy was called Killing Hope, and the one on JFK in November is called Killing Democracy. I really think that's what was killed in these instances. But we need to restore it, and the world is waiting for us to restore it because it's affecting all of them. But we really have a great deal more to be afraid of in the people that are supposedly protecting us than we do from each other or anyone else that lives abroad. All we do is change our policies, and then, because Bush came out and he said, well, the terrorists are coming after us because we're large in country and we're pluralistic and we're rich and we're democratic and we're free, and they can't stand that. And I said, well, why aren't they bombing Canada then? Have something to do with the foreign policy?
Right.
I mean, it doesn't justify the mass murder. That was a crime against humanity on 9/11. But that could have been dealt with in an international court and should have been. It wasn't a cause for us to start wars and kill more people now than died that day on this excuse that, somebody did something wrong. And in fact, the Taliban 3 times offered to turn bin Laden over to an international tribunal, and the U.S. said, well, we don't negotiate with terrorists.
Well, we do. That's our history. Thomas Jefferson with them pirates.
Yes.
Napoleon, I mean, name them.
Yes.
Everybody.
Well, and who are you calling a terrorist? I mean, I'm sure the British called us terrorists when we revolted against them, but, it's just a, it's just a matter of dealing with things, in an international forum and using courts for crimes. This was not an act of war. But we took it as an excuse to go to war because we wanted to go to war anyway. Colin Powell in August and July told the surrounding countries that we were going into Afghanistan in mid-October and take out the Taliban. And, it was already planned. 9/11 became a good excuse, but the war would have happened anyway because the Taliban wouldn't let an oil pipeline come down from the Caspian Sea.
Was the Taliban a guest of honor of Governor Bush? Like in,
yeah,
2009 or something like that?
Yeah, the Taliban had met with Bush out at his.
And he said he don't negotiate with terrorists? But we don't negotiate with terrorists?
We negotiate them when we're arming them, and then we damn them later.
Yeah, like President Saddam becomes tyrant.
They'll fight on. I mean, we were great friends with Saddam Hussein when he was carrying.
He was president then, though. He was president, right? Now he's the tyrant dictator.
That's right.
Just like Ronald REagan. I mean, he was a good friend with the Bush family, correct?
Absolutely. So it's.
I mean, I just like it's just so much. Your
friend and your enemy, depending on where their policy is going, it has nothing to do with their character. I mean, they're not. They aren't nice guys, but if we want to use them, then they're our friends. If we don't want them and they're in our way, then they're our enemies.
What do you think of Barack Obama? You think that he's still part of the same status quo of a politician, more so than
I don't see him addressing the real issues that are facing the African American community.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see him talking about police brutality or the prison population or the drugs or the impoverishment. I see him using a rhetoric that he borrows from Dr. King and from the Kennedys and applying this sort of hope for change, but it looks like change light to me. I don't see him addressing the real issues, and I think the incident with Reverend Wright is very telling because he can't look Obama can't look like he's got an ounce of resentment or even consciousness about the oppression of black people by white people or the cost of racism.
There's more of a strategy. I mean, can you be like a Kennedy? The Kennedy family say we don't want to offend the Southern Democrats.
I think the people up at that level are there because some segment of the ruling class wants them there. I mean, he's gotten big money from insurance and banking companies. Some segment of the ruling class wants Obama as their representative, and maybe they want a black person because it seems more acceptable, or
it makes it easier.
Yeah, but in terms of his actual policies, he's talking about adding 100,000 troops to the military. Well, what does he want to do with them? He's talking about going into Pakistan and staying in Afghanistan. He's talking about changing the policy in Iraq, but only slightly. And he's talking about using a nuclear option in Iran, and he says that he'll do everything the other day to stop Iran from building a nuclear weapon, even though all the inspectors and everybody else says they aren't. So he's buying into the neocon rhetoric, the same lies that got us into the war in Iraq. They want to take us into a war in Iran, and they may take us in before the election.
Yeah, it's looking that way. But I just want to know, like, you don't think that could be part of his, like, some Machiavellian thing, like it's a strategy thing more so than I came close to anybody to kiss in the ring of the White House as far as a person of color. Let me just play this game. Like, is that the same thing with the Kennedys when they just invited Sammy Davis Jr., a supporter from the White House because of his interracial relationship with his fiance, or Southern Democrats didn't want, like, even with the James Meredith thing when he was calling Governor Barnett, he was trying to make nice with Governor Barnett as far as same to James Meredith, getting into Ole Miss. You don't think this is like kind of like with Governor Faubus, who was a Democrat, who was not Governor Faubus, but I think the mayor of Little Rock.
Okay.
There's the mayor of Little Rock.
I don't remember his name, but
it was one guy, like, they were saying that they were just doing what they got to do to get keep peace, play nice.
Yes.
With the status quo.
Sometimes they will, and sometimes they'll put in somebody that lets everybody sit down and think everything's okay for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Then they'll start pushing again, depending on what the response is. But, I mean, we've had an African American Secretary of State, and
look what happened.
Certainly do. I mean, we've had two. We've had African Americans sitting in those seats, but how have they changed the policy? And my view is that as long as the white supremacism reigns, that you can be allowed, a woman or a black person can be allowed to sit in that white man's seat, but they must do what the white man would do while they're there.
You're telling so much truth right now, because that's why I look at it. Cause I'm trying to figure out why would anybody want to be president? It's like Jimmy Carter got more things done after leaving the White House.
I was just reading Kurt Vonnegut today, and he said that you have to be mentally disturbed to want to be president. He said,
I know. I'm trying to figure it out. Why would anybody want to be president?
He said that was even true in high school, that the people who ran for high school president was president.
Well, he just tells nothing but the truth, and this guy was a World War II veteran. And he's seen some terrible stuff. The horrors of war. Anybody, the fact that I can read that General Grant, who won the Civil War, hated the sight of human blood.
Yes.
And that's interesting. This guy was a general, hated the sight of human blood. That means, although people die, even with Eisenhower, who ever saw, like, the World War I active combat duty as a MacArthur or as a General Patton, was a guy of reason. When you hear MacArthur, and thank God for Harry Truman, say, look, man, you can't nuke everybody. He wanted to nuke Indochina, but then you had MacArthur telling Johnson that Vietnam was a mistake, correct?
Yes. And
so the end of his life.
Yeah, well, Hemingway once said, if you want to have a war, don't ask the infantry and don't ask the dead. They know what war is. And, and there's many people, even in this administration, who raised voices before and since it started that have been opposing the war in Iraq in the Defense Department, but many of them have been removed. And, anybody that has any sense knows not to go that way, but Curtis LeMay and the other people in the room with the Kennedys during the Cuban Missile Crisis, all but a few of Kennedy's advisors and his brother and himself, the rest wanted to go into nuclear war. And LeMay argued that, there would be a certain level of loss of life and industrial capacity, but we'd survive it, and the Soviets wouldn't. And we had more weapons, and we would just take them out, and then there wouldn't be any more Cold War. And Kennedy said, he kept saying, gentlemen, we can't go to nuclear war. And in fact, some of Kennedy's strongest statements have never been transcribed. There was a book that came out that purported to be a transcript of the Cuban Missile Crisis tapes at the Kennedy Library that were released under the JFK Act. And the head of the Presidential Library, Kennedy Library, said that no student or scholar could rely on these transcriptions. They came from a place called the Miller Center. They were done by a guy named Timothy Naftali, and the book was co-authored by Philip Zelikow and Ernst May. Now, you may not know those three names, but those are the three main authors of the 9/11 Commission report.
Oh, wow.
And this guy said you can't rely on the scholarship of these guys because in cases where they said it was unintelligible, they were the strongest statements being made against nuclear war by the Kennedy. And that they were not only not unintelligible, they were the most politically significant parts of the discussion. These guys left them out of the book. And they formed this Miller Center, and they want to be an official repository of all statements. And Naftali, was the head of the transcription section. And they're fudging it, basically.
Now, we just got to...
about 9/11.
And that's something, because I know I talked to Officer Ed Reddick. I was getting back to Dr. King's assassination. He was on the security detail.
Yeah.
He was, I talked to him. I got a chance to talk to him for about 91 minutes on my show.
That's great.
And he was just talking about some of the stuff he said. They came to him with offers about getting these nice government position jobs. And he was talking about how he's the director of the Fire and Police Commission, was working for J.F.K. Hoover for like 12 or 13 years, and how they took him out to detail, how he had life, threats against his life, and he just told me all types of weird stuff going on. Even some of the folks, like he said, the folks that moved, like the Bill Moyers. I'm not pointing out Bill Moyers per se, but I look at the people around King, and the folks who really, like the Andrew Youngs and some other folks.
Yeah.
But they end up doing. Then you look at somebody like Hosea Williams. So he ended up doing like Jesus meeting with his disciples, saying, one of y'all gonna betray me. And this is how they're going to come at you. It's like, even I look at Fred Hampton, and then I look at Bobby Rush. It made me wonder about some stuff.
Well, I was always frustrated. I was trying to get the King files loose for many years, from the 80s forward. And I kept running into people in the Congressional Black Caucus, and even people that had been on the House Select Committee for Assassination had seen the record, and they didn't want them released. And, I was like, well, why wouldn't you want them released? I mean, they would show something about the government, what role they had. And then it's dawned on me over time, talking to these people, that I think that they say that there's dirt on Dr. King. But, I mean, first of all, consider the source of the dirt. It's Hoover's informants, so what is it worth?
Right.
Secondly, if King was a human being, he had an affair or something, that's not going to take away from his legacy, What I think we're afraid of is that there's information on there about who among them around King were the informants for the government. And that's what they don't want released.
I just know a lot of them are. And then it ain't going to be the usual suspects either. I think a lot of people are going to be surprised. And then things I release who to really come, because it's always the people closest to you.
Yes, that's right.
But I just think it's
hotel arrangements, who were the people moving him out of the room.
So Ed Reddick told him that you should not, get that on that balcony. He said you should get on the main floor. He said that's
the original room was on the lower floor, and it was changed. Somebody came to the landlady, and the landlady had a heart attack that day after he was killed. Felt responsible, Lorraine.
So the DIA was very much involved, you would say.
Yeah.
They had military people on the ground.
And it's really the military and the military-industrial complex that these people were threatening.
You know what's funny is George Washington talked about this too.
That's interesting.
He said beware, of the false patriots.
Yes.
They wrap themselves up in the flag, whatever. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but I'm saying he basically knew.
He said, look out for foreign entanglements. He opposed parties. You should go back and read his last statement when he left office. He's got a lot to speak to today. And he said some very telling things about what America should or shouldn't get involved with.
Oh, no, you just keep on.
They didn't want standing armies. They didn't want these political parties manipulating everything. He said policies should belong to the people as a whole, and parties put them back in the hands of a few.
That's right, but then wasn't one of his boys, Alexander Hamilton, that helped play a part in the way things.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I love looking at the John Adams series. It's like it's entertainment, but it's like to put flesh on the bones and on the dust, make him and to see I could see that being. I could see Alexander Hamilton, had he lived, being like a Napoleon-like president.
Yeah.
Or being like this guy that was about conquest. Because you look at, I mean, we don't control our economy. We don't control our media. I mean, Rupert Murdoch is not from America.
That's right.
But yeah, he got all these control of these media outlets. I'm just saying, everything we're not in control.
Yes.
And then you feel so hopeless, and you look at the fact that people that do inspire you, they snuff them out just like that. But at the same time, it's like what Dr. Henry Clark said so many years ago. You should bury the man and continue the plan. It's not about one person being the change agent. Like you said, it's the will of the people.
Yes.
It's the people will.
I mean, we need leadership at times, but it can't be a leadership that replaces.
Not like an idol, like, you know how we worship idols and stuff.
No, and we need to be able to build communities that, you know, that have leaders among them, but they don't. When the leaders are lost, it doesn't mean the whole community falls apart.
You know what? And it's funny, Brock. I've been reading the Eyes on the Prize transcripts or whatever, and I always like come across this thing by Ella Baker, you know, having a debate with Dr. King about, you know, community, you know, leadership versus a Messiah or Messianic like leadership. You know, like, you know, they take one person to do everything, but you're saying it's the community. So even in Montgomery, it was the community, the Montgomery people that put Dr. King on that platform, even he didn't want to be on that platform. They gave him the platform. They gave him the movement. And, like, you know, movement produced leaders. So how is it you know, even with John, I mean, just looking at the John Adams miniseries, how he was so reluctant to be a part, but once he became a part, then it was no stopping him. But a lot of them guys, I mean, like, anytime you find something that you're so passionate about, that you're willing to put anything on the line, ain't nothing really can stop you but yourself. I mean, even with what you're doing, Brother Judge, it's like the stuff that you're doing, ain't nobody can stop you but you. I mean, because, like, to me, it's like what you're doing is so interesting. It's kind of like when I discovered jazz for the first time in college, and then when I started listening to Miles Davis, then I started looking at his side men like Bill Evans or John Coltrane, then I follow, there's another branch I follow on to, there's another branch on that, and another branch. Everything leads to something else. Because, like, what you were talking about, everything is interconnected. Like, you talking about Dr. Noguchi earlier, I know. But that's the same dude that did the autopsy on Marilyn Monroe and found some fishy stuff about it. So all this stuff is interrelated. Like you said, the same folks that keep on popping up, making these bestseller books.
Actually, they almost didn't have Noguchi do the autopsy. They were, you know who they were calling to bring in to do the RFK autopsy? Dr. Francesco, who had refused to do an autopsy on Dr. King in Memphis, out of respect to the family, he said, and so he never traced the path of the bullet into the body.
Oh, wow. And who is Dr. Francesco? Was he the one that did it on Kennedy? Or?
He's Francesco. He did Martin Luther King. He also did Elvis Presley, and they called him to bring him out to L.A. to do RFK.
Oh.
But you know, because he'd botched the other ones, they knew he was a good liar. So and I find these certain coroners showing up, but thankfully we got Noguchi, and even though he doesn't talk about it now today, but I mean he did a real autopsy. And when you do that, you get different information.
Right.
Than these corrupt medical examiners, you know, and you know, not to do the autopsy on King and find out what direction the bullet came from means that, you know, a lie was perpetrated for many years that Ray was the gunman when he was not, and it also keeps you from looking for who the real gunman is. But some of these cases are getting reopened, Emmett Till and, you know, Medgar Evers, and you know, some of that history is being reopened, and I think we have constantly the possibility to find out new things and get to the truth about the past, but also about the present.
Let me ask you, like, does it make it easy, like the people that the subject that you are investigating, they live, you know, relatively not too long ago, and you know, you got the media, the newspapers, you had the TV. Does it make it easier to investigate these guys' murders than it does, say, Abraham Lincoln or William McKinley? The conspiracies behind those.
You might have more records. You might have more kinds of, you know, testimony that you can access. You know, it's tougher in the past. I have seen contemporary studies of those shootings too, and there's questions that were raised about the ballistics in them and Sacco and Vanzetti, you know, and I've looked back, and I've also seen some of the older lies that the police told, like in the Sacco and Vanzetti trial, ballistic trick they used in their testimony was used in the Robert Kennedy testimony. You know,
wow.
Those guns, so the same words were used, that the bullet was consistent with having been fired with a gun, which is ballistically meaningless. It just means that it wasn't too large a bullet caliber to fit into the barrel of the gun. But, you know, it sounds like you're saying it was the same gun. It's not what it means at all. You know, so I call that, if it ain't broke, you don't fix it. I was talking to a guy who worked at Bethesda on Kennedy's autopsy, young intern, and then he saw Kennedy, even though he was in rigor, put into a three-piece suit without cutting it, underwear and everything, and that impressed him. And how they plastered the head and got that back into shape. And he said he was very impressed with this funeral home, Farrell's, that's here in D.C., and he said that they're an old funeral home and they go back 150 years. And I said, well, they didn't do Lincoln, did they? And he said, oh, yes.
He was preserved pretty well when they, opened up his casket.
If it ain't broke, you don't fix it.
Wow.
I met the guy's daughter in the street one time, and, I played a little stupid, and I said, oh, that's a famous funeral home. I said, didn't you do Kennedy? And she said, yeah. So my dad's done lots of famous people. I said, really? Who else did he do? She said, Howard Hughes. I said, Howard Hughes? They don't have undertakers in Texas?
You saying this guy is probably, I ain't gonna say it, but you saying that, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
If it ain't broke, you don't fix it.
I got you.
That
is so interesting. That is so, it's just, man, all this stuff is interrelated. I mean, does it really, overwhelm you at times when you find out all this stuff and meet all these people?
I mean, my mentor was Mae Brussel, and I remember I'd find some new thing in a connection and this information. I'd call her up and I'd say, Mae, have you seen this? And I'd tell her about it, and she'd say, oh, my aching ass. And she'd laugh, so you got to laugh so as not to cry. I mean, but like I said, if I couldn't know, I'd be in much worse shape. I'd rather know the truth and deal with the truth than deal with a lie and be in confusion and believe what I next heard and think it was, aliens from Mars, or it was, who knows what I'd convince myself of. But, I'd rather know what the truth is. And, we can only have democracy if it's an informed democracy, and we can only move forward historically and otherwise if we know what the truth is, and then we can act on it.
You said freedom ain't free, like so many people said, and Socrates had to die for his truth.
Yes.
I don't think a lot of folks willing to die for their truth. They were to
take it, some of us die for it, but if more of us don't die or be willing to die for the truth, or at least live for the truth, then all of us will die.
Amen to that. And before I let you guys know, I mean, I could, like I said, talk to you for hours. But I just want to touch on, you brought up Howard Hughes. Now I'm looking at your website. And you had this guy that actually worked, John Meyer, had a YouTube connection to the interview you did about Howard Hughes' involvement in the RFK assassination. I kept on thinking to what you said about JFK pissing off all people down in Texas and so many other factions in the ruling class. And so Howard Hughes, do you feel he played a very direct role, or just so happened to some of the people?
Well, he played a direct role in monopolizing certain military contracts, and they wanted him out.
Okay.
He was also rich and independent and powerful, and they
wanted dangerous.
And Harold Talbot, who was a Secretary of the Air Force, moved against him, got him dumped off of one of the Pan Am board, I think it was, and put his brother in instead. And so there were people moving against him, but he had monopoly control over airplane part manufacturing and dashboard stuff that they didn't want him to have in the Eisenhower administration. And there were people that eventually moved. And he was dead long before they said he was dead. He was killed about 71. And they maintained this fictitious Hughes that nobody could see, but they got orders written on.
Well, you say he was dead in 71?
Yes, I believe he was killed by 71. That's what.
But this is like the funeral home that the funeral home that he was.
Well, I think they substituted another body for him when they came, but that's what I'm saying. They had this funeral home go out and do the, fix him up. But I mean, maybe that's because they had to cover who he was. But I think there's a lot of evidence that after a certain point he was taken out. Noah Dietrich was dumped out. People were paid consistently $2 million to say that they'd seen him. And Robert Mayhew worked there for years without ever seeing him, just getting notes. This Mormon mafia surrounded him, and the Glomar Explorer and the Hughes Medical Institute were basically fronts for intelligence operations after that. Finally, the IRS said, if you don't produce a live or dead Hughes in 2 weeks, we're coming in and closing Summa Corporation, the whole thing down. And at that point, Hughes supposedly died in Mexico, and then he's flown back and buried.
So the Mormon mafia, Romney people took him out. Romney's people, I'm sorry.
Well, the Mormons had ties with FBI and CIA, so that's what I'm talking about, is they had those guys basically surround the fake Hughes. They'd move him through airports in a casket or a box, and they'd say no one could see him. They claimed
that's amazing.
Germs, but basically no one saw Hughes for almost 20 years.
Man, it doesn't really, so this, what about this Bilderbergs, group, the Bilderbergs or the
Bilderbergs?
There's
segments of, the Bilderbergs were early attempts after World War II, to to integrate policy between the United States and the Western Europe countries and the rich, and they have their organizations, but a lot of people focus solely on the Trilateral Commission and the Eastern establishment. But at the end, what none of the Birchers of the right wing will ever talk about is the fact that at the end of World War II, a new economy had been created around the war production, and it was mostly in the southern rim. And then there was oil and land speculation. There was aerospace and munitions, mostly focused in the southern rim. So some of that money was greater than the Rockefellers had. Like H.L. Hunt, the Dallas oil man, had more money than the Rockefellers, but he didn't know how to use it as slyly.
Yeah, he hated Kennedy too, right? He really hated Kennedy.
He hated Kennedy, and was part of the planning. Hunt was there at the Murchison Ranch meeting. But he said, when I go east, they treat me like a stable hand. So one good book on all that is The Yankee Cowboy War by Carl Oglesby. It was written some years ago. I don't think it's completely out of print, but if you can get hold of that, it starts to explicate this rise of a new Southern Rim money. Kirkpatrick Sale writes about it in a book called Power Shift. And that's the origins of the military-industrial complex. It's not the Eastern establishment or the Trilateral Commission. They talk about the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations. The Trilateral Commission was basically a way to control Japan and Germany after the war, because Japan and Germany lost the war in large part because they have no internal oil source. The whole war with Japan started with a naval blockade of oil going to Japan, and it was in response to that Pearl Harbor was attacked. And all during the war, they had to try to get oil sources. We sent 30,000 troops in to protect the Dolman Dome that was discovered in Saudi Arabia, the largest oil deposit in the world, from Rommel and the Germans getting their hands on it. And those troops were commanded by Norman Schwarzkopf Sr. So it's no, and then his son was there with him. He knew the sheikhs, and it's no coincidence that Junior came in to run the Gulf War. But oil and the control of oil and who gets it and who doesn't, and having them by the short hairs on oil through the OPEC deals and the other deals that we made, and the American dominance of the oil meant that we could pull them into a new axis and get them to agree, even though they were capitalist competitors to us at that point. We could get them to agree to our world agenda and to go along on what we wanted to do, because otherwise we wouldn't sell them any oil.
It's like you said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Man, oh my God.
So I'm just saying there's at least two large elements to the class, and those elements clashed, I think, in '63. Part of the Kennedy assassination is the rise of that Southern Rim money, that new money, against the old Eastern establishment money.
I'm asking this too. I think he was very, history teacher, my mentor in high school, he pointed out something that I thought was very interesting. He said the Kennedy boys were not able to get hit until their father had that paralyzing stroke.
That's right.
So you think their father was...
Father got sick, the boys started to move away from the agenda. The Iron Fist was gone, and, they started to respond to different themes than he would have had. And I don't know, do you read any Ishmael Reed? Do you know him? He's a black satirist. He's a writer. But in his book Mumbo Jumbo, the introduction of the book, he says that the real history of the world is a history of competing conspiracies.
I like that. That's pretty...
understand, and that there's 6 guys at a table running the world. There aren't. And any human organization falls apart, and young Turks rise, and they fight internally. But, it's competing conspiracies, and so you got to look for more than one.
That makes so much sense. I think that's you have any, words of wisdom for people, who just, they discovering all this stuff, and they feel so overwhelmed by the way the world really works, or how the competing conspiracy things are working out right now.
Well, I used to say, that, and it's still true, that just remember there's more of us, and we can think, and not to be disheartened. I have a lot of hope, because I think things can change, and if there's anywhere in the world where there's more information flow and more democratic tradition and more resources and more capability and more of a tradition of thinking about change and dissent than here, I don't know where it is. And even if it wasn't that's the case, we have a responsibility to history and to the planet itself at this point. If we and the rest of the world are going to survive or have any justice, it really rests on us. I think that we're in about the same position that the German people were in September of '39. Poland's been invaded, the Holocaust is looming, the World War has been declared, and it was really up to the Germans to stop Hitler, and it's up to the Americans to stop this nonsense. But it does belong to us. It's our country. We can make of it what we will. It's our military. We can change it if we want to. It's our media. It's our educational system. As long as they have us dependent on them, and afraid of them, then we're going to feel powerless. They teach us that we're powerless. But the reality is that they don't go to all these lengths of assassinating people and spying on everybody and all the stuff that COINTELPRO did because we're afraid of them. It's because they're afraid of us. They know what our power is if we decide not to play along and to just say we're going to make a different world. We're going to build a different world that reflects what we want and our values. And that's always been the real American tradition, is that if government serves the interests of the people, it survives, and if it doesn't, it moves on, it changes. Jefferson didn't expect 200 years later that the government would look the same or be the same as what he envisioned. He knew that every generation had to make its own revolution, at least in thought, in order to make liberty what they felt it should be, and he wouldn't lock them into the past. And we need that vision now, but we also need to start thinking about how can we create energy independent and financially independent communities on a more local level, because this larger system is not going to take care of it. It's collapsing in on us. And it's just going to get harder and harder for everybody to live, especially when the bulk of the money is monopolized into the hands of the few, and what there is in terms of tax money is taken away for wars and for security and spying and all of that, instead of for human needs. But energy independence can go down to the household, and credit systems can be set up in communities, and we can survive. There were communities that survived the Depression by changing their currency and using local currency. There wasn't any less labor, there wasn't any less raw material, there wasn't any less technical knowledge. There was just no money, no credit. Well, money isn't wealth. So they...
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Sorry?
No, go ahead.
And I just think, we have to think outside the box, and we have to start to trust each other and cut across some of the lines that the system wants against us, because otherwise it's just Republican family values, as I call it. I've got mine, the hell with you. And that only goes so far, and it doesn't have to do with the community that King envisioned. But I think we can take hope. I don't think we have to put all that hope in politicians and rhetoric. I think we can start to talk to each other and build a different society. And, I do work still in support of Cynthia McKinney's campaign, the Green Party, and the Reconstructionist Party. And, she's a genuine person, and, she wants to give voice to many of the concerns that none of these campaigns are arguing about or debating, but that are the concerns of real people every day. And I just think we have to stop worrying about what they're going to do to us and start deciding how we want to live without them.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, Cynthia McKinney is one of the true greats. I mean, the tradition of protest and dissent, but not only out of hatred or disagreement with what people are doing, but for love of country in this pure sense, like Frederick Douglass, writing when he wrote about the 4th of July. Also, I just think about, the fact that when I'm hearing you talking, I'm getting all these visions, bothering. I'm thinking about what them cats, back in the day when Republic was first founded, how they had their rebellion because they said we don't, use money, we use, alcohol, whatever. We bothered. That's that way they survived. That's how they, got along as a community. Or I think about the bonus army fiasco.
Yeah.
Of the early 30s, and you had the military industrial complex and a poor leadership in the form of Herbert Hoover, who could not control his corporate thugs or his army thugs.
Yes.
Fighting against war heroes, and then that's how the GI Bill. The GI Bill didn't come because Roosevelt, all the other. It came because folks demanded it, and they willingly put their lives on the line for it.
Yes. Well, and things have changed over the time. We have a license plate in D.C., and Bush has to put it on his cars too. that says taxation without representation, because we don't have Congress. But if you really wanted taxation with representation, then I think we should be allowed to allocate our tax when we pay it. If we're going to pay income tax, we should have the last page say, this is where I want my tax to go.
I agree. That makes a lot of great sense to me.
And I think that it wouldn't end up all in the coffers of the military and the Homeland Security and the spies. It would go back to human needs. And I think anything else is just a game. I mean, I think these representatives don't represent us. And
in perpetual campaign, I agree with Scott McCullough, perpetual campaign mode in D.C. It's like every 2 years or every 6 years or something, every 4 years you got to run for office.
Yeah.
You can't really do anything. You got to focus about yourself. You can't focus on needs of others.
Nobody's running in most of these major seats who aren't backed by substantial money. I mean, very few of them get, grassroots base. I mean, most of them are taking money from big corporations, and that's allowed. And most of the races are rigged to who can run and what the debate will be about and who will come out of it. And the Decodes machines have probably more to say about who will be the president than any of us at this point. I saw a nice poster the other day. It said, "Live free or die bold."
I like that. I love that play on words. I would like to talk, but you're a DC guy. I mean, you know the Beltway in and out. Like about the significance of Tim Russell. Did his program Meet the Press play any significance as far as enlightening people? You think it was a part of the corporate?
Well, I mean, I think it's
ran by GE.
It ask a few questions that aren't asked by the rest of the mainstream media, but most of that stuff, I don't watch TV, but I would hear it on C-SPAN. They put it on C-SPAN radio, which I listen to, and he'd get a zinger in once in a while, but generally, he was operating in the same framework as the others. He wasn't going to ask the really hard questions, and it was more refreshing than the people who just don't ask anything, at the White House press conference. But that's already controlled, who they let in, and they have to submit their questions in advance and everything. It's all a game show. But
he was a company man. I mean, like he was like a Bill Moyers. He came up.
Yeah, I mean they're still within a certain framework, and the debate, as I see it on television and hear it on the news, it's mostly a fight debate too. It's like, this guy said this about you, so what do you say about him? And then they go,
right. Yeah, it's school fight. Yeah.
Mark Twain said it takes two people to hurt you, your enemy to slander you, and your friend to bring it to you.
Right.
That's most of what I see on there. But I think the debate now is framed between an open fascist and a moderate conservative. And I think that a liberal is what a communist was in the 50s. And that makes the rest of us that are beyond liberal into terrorists in that framework.
That's why I guess people say, that's why Kennedy identified so much with Khrushchev.
Yes.
They was able to work together because they were both liberal.
Yes.
But that is so fascinating. I mean, because, do you feel like I know John McCain called for a town hall style meetings and said, Barry Goldwater, they said him and Kennedy should campaign in the same plane or whatever. Yeah. But,
that would have been a hell of a crash, huh? That's like an old joke when you're running. Right? There were jokes in years when there were all bad candidates and somebody said they were all together in a plane and had a crash, and who do you think was saved? And they said, the country, of course.
Hey, man, people got some points, but
yeah.
It is really, you think they'll include like Stephanie McKinney, somebody who really stands for the issues in that town hall style meetings, or either Ralph Nader, consumer rights or whatever he does.
Well, I think we need more town hall, and I think we need more direct participatory democracy. I don't think we can expect representatives to represent 400,000 people at a time. They don't even try. How can they?
Right.
We need to represent ourselves and not be afraid of ourselves, and say what we mean and have debates. And that's why I want to open up the media to have full debates on issues so we can make an informed decision that's heard all sides and, makes a decision based on information. I'm not afraid of information. I'm not afraid of the masses. I'm not an elitist. I trust ordinary people to have common sense if they can get the facts. And I think that's, I would rather live in a participatory democratic society where decisions are made, by the people that they affect, not by the people that they don't, than in this this model, which I think is basically obsolete. It dates to a century when travel and communication was a horse and a boat. You had to send a representative because you couldn't send everybody in town away for weeks. So you sent somebody out, probably a guy you liked having around the least, got him out of town for a couple of weeks, and he'd go see his piece, come back and tell you what he heard. But, you know, we're not in that. We're in the 21st century. We have instantaneous communication, almost instantaneous travel. We can easily communicate with each other if we want to in many, many ways. So that communication, which is a public benefit and also still legally a commonwealth, should be taken back. But they're stealing all of the commonwealth. I mean, they'll be stealing our air soon. They're already selling our water to us in bottles.
That's like psychology for you.
And sell it back to us in its most distorted form. But you know, I think that we need to fight to maintain and expand commonwealth again. There's an old ditty from the 1300s when the nobles started using the land deeds to take their land away and make them pay, you know, part of their crop for rent, and established, you know, basically as much land as they could hire thugs to protect would become theirs under deed, you know, and fenced in and charged for. And the ditty that the people made up was they hang the man and flog the woman who steal the goose from off the common, but the other man they let go loose who steal the common from the goose.
Powerful.
So it's like Mother Jones, you know, was in prison for labor organizing, and she asked the guy next to her in the cell, said, "What did you do?" He said, "I stole a pair of shoes." She said, "You should have stole a railroad. You could have become a senator."
Well, she told the truth. I just think that this is very, I mean, it's interesting, because you know what's funny, too, when you say that about the railroads, and I think about, you know, people like J.P. Morgan and people like that. And I think about Teddy Roosevelt, how they, you know, everybody trying to compare John McCain, the quote-unquote maverick, to Teddy Roosevelt. To me, Teddy Roosevelt was a true maverick, because he did things that a lot of folks wouldn't dare to do, Republican or Democrat or independent son. I mean, he you know, he was a very complicated man to me. Yeah. And I can't compare John McCain to, you know, Teddy Roosevelt. I don't think he measured up. And I think Teddy Roosevelt said something that was very important. I mean, I could paraphrase him. I can't quote him outright, but he said it's your duty as a patriot to question the president.
That's right.
You should always question your leadership. If you don't, you're not doing your job.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the most democratic things that's happened recently is that Dennis Kucinich has introduced on the floor and read them out 35 articles of impeachment against Bush, and I had a small role in helping him with that and the research behind it, and I also gave materials to Cynthia McKinney, who introduced an impeachment bill on Bush back in December of '06, but it was completely ignored. But Kucinich got this on C-SPAN. He read it out loud. The clerk had to read it again. It's taken up about 10 hours of you know, floor time already. It was referred to the Judiciary Committee, and I think we really need to be pushing for that Judiciary Committee to do hearings on this and examine these charges, because they're all serious and they're well documented in his, you know, in his presentation. And the thing that's clear, and it's the language that opens each one of the articles, is that Bush, it's not just the single things that he does that somebody doesn't like or a laundry list. The pattern that emerges from what these charges show is that Bush has violated his oath of office. His oath of office says that he has to protect and defend the Constitution. He's not done that. He's violated the Constitution. He told some of the Republicans that came up with concerns about it early on, he said, "Don't throw the Constitution in my face. It's just a piece of effing paper." And that's how much he cares for it. And he's violated the Constitution. He hasn't protected and defended it. He's supposed to carry out, you know, faithfully his duties as the president and make sure that the laws are faithfully executed under Article 2 in the Constitution. And all three of those he's violated. And that's where we have to start the discussion, is that there's not a single thing this guy promised to do or he's required to do under the Constitution that he has kept. And these are just 35 examples of, you know, more that could easily be made of that pattern on all fronts. And, you know, and principles that go back even before the Constitution, like habeas corpus, that he's thrown in the trash. This guy is completely out of control. But, you know, Ben Franklin said it's easier to impeach him than to overthrow him all the time.
Yeah, I agree.
Impeachment is a good tool, and it ought to be used. And it ought to be used for something more serious than lying about sex.
We are definitely in agreement on that. And so, Brother John Judge, what would be the best way for people to contact you? If they want to get in touch with you.
They can get me through the website, Coalition. The Coalition on Political Assassinations website is politicalassassinationsPlural.com. COPA, C-O-P-A, at starpower.net, N-E-T. That's our email address. And people can write me if they want at P.O. Box 772, Washington, D.C., 20044. And my goal for the future is to establish here in D.C. a hidden history museum that will tell the real history of this country to young people and visitors, the 6 million that come every year, and to have a research arm with the books and the materials and the research so people can look into things. But to get something here that tells something other than the official story. And I want to do that here in Washington, D.C.
I definitely look forward to that. I don't know if Smithsonian will be interested, but they should. I think there's enough people out here. And like you said, so many different ways to get the information out there, but I think it's more than enough people that are just waiting for a place like that to visit and to really help disseminate information.
Bill Cosby had an ad out for a African-American History Museum, and he said if 1 million people send us $8, we can do it. So it's the same for us. I mean, if people send us, they don't send us a lot, but they send us $10 or $15, to tell the real history of this country from now on at a museum right here in D.C., then we can open it up.
Okay, well, we put that out in the air and hope it can materialize. I think it's so important, and hopefully we hear more of you on different mainstream quote-unquote outlets like the Fox News and the MSNBC.
I'll do what I can.
I definitely
don't get a lot of that coverage. I need to be out there, but it's tough, And we did get mention of our conference in the AP national news events. We got Japanese national TV come and cover it. I've gotten on C-SPAN sometimes, but getting on the mainstream, the corporate press is very, very hard. But people need to push for being visible in all kind of mediums. So thank you for what you do. Get the word out.
I mean, it's really an honor, man. I mean, I'm just very impressed with what you have to offer. Like I said, I could talk, or I maybe just listen to you talk for hours, and hopefully, like through this medium, we can, inform and inspire more people. I think it's definitely important that people start questioning things and realize that they are more powerful than they know and beyond measure, and not be afraid of that power, and learn how to harness that power and direct it into the right, resources and causes. So I just thank you for, shedding a light on some of what we can offer each other in this time, in this dire time, because I think it's so important that we do be aware.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Brother John Judge, and have a great day.
You take care.
You too.